like that time you called your teacher mum, we all occasionally say things we regret. So imagine how difficult it must be when you have to regularly say things that are recorded and documented online, meaning in the future people can use them against you. That would be absolutely awful. By the way, unrelated, but I think Malta is going to win the World Cup in 2026, and if they don't, I'll give away all my income. What? It's a problem that affects game developers in particular. We all know what a picky bunch the gaming community is, so when a developer promises something or makes a comment that could come back to bite them on the bum years later, you better believe there's a group of people eagerly waiting to count the tooth marks. In that vein, here is a collection of quotes uttered by game developers that aged about as well as that guy who drinks from the wrong grail at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Look, just go and Google it, it's a really good reference.
Resistance, rebellion. You will burn these ideas away.
Hope cannot save them!
Let's face it, no one's ever really liked microtransactions. We just accept them these days because they're a necessary evil, like browser cookies or the McRib. Usually if developers put microtransactions in a game, they're at least savvy enough to realise that they shouldn't draw too much attention to them, because it's pretty hard to put a positive spin on them. It's especially tricky when said microtransactions don't actually add extra content to the game, and are purely there to make money off of players' impatience. This was the case when Star Wars Battlefront II was released, and it quickly emerged that to play as the best characters, you either had to grind for ages or pay up extra cash to speed up the process.
Sector is clear. Not clear! Not clear!
One user on Reddit complained that even though they had spent $80 on the deluxe edition of the game, they still couldn't play as Darth Vader unless they either paid even more money or spent roughly 40 hours earning XP to get him, a level of grinding that would make Tony Hawk grimace. A member of EA's community team replied to the Reddit user defending the grinding with a truly world-beatingly awful quote, saying, "The intent is to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes." Which is a bit like saying, look, I know I'm kicking you in the groin right now, but imagine how brilliant you'll feel when I'm no longer kicking you in the groin. Safe to say the suggestion that players should take pride in grinding for 40 hours to unlock a key character didn't go down too well. The reply became the most downvoted in Reddit history, earning a spot in the 2020 Guinness Book of World Records as a result. And when your comment finds itself sharing page space with the world's longest mustache and the most number of spoons balanced on a human body, you know you've said something monumentally wrong.
So stick with 360, that's your message if you don't like it?
If you have zero access to the internet, that is an offline device. I mean, seriously, when I read the blogs and thought about who's really the most impacted, there was a person who said, hey, I'm on a nuclear sub.
Right.
And I don't even know what it means to be on a nuclear sub, but I've got to imagine that it's not easy to get an internet connection.
If you wanted to be as generous as possible to the Xbox One, you could say that many of the decisions Microsoft made when revealing the console were just a little bit too ahead of their time.
And if you didn't want to be generous?
Absolute show. A lot of the things the Xbox One was criticised for have become commonplace now, including consoles with a selection of entertainment apps, voice activation, and the idea of a digital-only future where you can't trade or loan the games you buy. We said commonplace, we didn't say good. One of the other big controversies when the Xbox One was announced was the fact that it would require a constant online connection, meaning anyone without access to the internet would have no way of using their Xbox One. Players weren't exactly sold on the idea of an always-on console, so Microsoft's president of interactive entertainment, Don Mattrick, gave an interview with ubiquitous game liker Jeff Keighley, in which Mattrick attempted to pour water on the sparks of anger that were just beginning to flicker. Unfortunately, in this tortured metaphor, Mattrick accidentally picked up the bottle marked gasoline and proceeded to make the matter worse by saying,
Fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Wow, okay. Was Don's PR minder taking a leak? The objectionable dismissiveness and tone deafness of Mattrick responding to genuine concerns from prospective customers went down like a lead balloon. Not only that, but shortly afterwards, Microsoft did a U-turn and decided the Xbox One wouldn't require a constant online connection after all. And Mattrick left Microsoft for a cushy job at Zynga just a few weeks later, not even sticking around long enough to witness the Xbox One get vastly outsold by the PS4. It's like leaving an unflushable deuce in your date's toilet and then escaping out the bathroom window. I know it was you, Brian. I know it was you.
A rating system is no substitute for corporate responsibility. And rating games will not make them less violent. Only manufacturers acting responsibly can do that by controlling game content and keeping outrageous games like Night Trap off the market.
In the early 90s, there was concern from parents that video games were getting too violent, thanks to nightmarishly gory games like Mortal Kombat. Hey, it was pretty intense at the time. Sega Mega CD game Night Trap was another game that found itself in the firing line, mainly because it used full motion video, which was pretty new for games at the time, and it was basically a video game version of a rubbish slasher movie where you have to protect a house full of teenage girls from the 90s vampires trying to kill them. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, this is not. Night Trap ended up being one of the main examples used during a pair of US Senate hearings on violent video games, where a bunch of senators who had clearly never played the game described it as promoting gratuitous violence and sexual aggression against women, rather than a silly B-movie game where the bad guys are numpties with tights over their heads armed with a plastic toy grabby claw. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, this is not. During the hearings, which called up Nintendo and Sega execs to give their side of the story, Nintendo of America's Vice President Howard Lincoln decided that he would play the good guy role and make it clear that Nintendo was a family-friendly company that didn't want anything to do with this ostensibly nasty violence.
Please, that won't be necessary.
Who are you?
We're SCAT, Special Control Attack Team.
Or, I guess, thinly veiled poop jokes. He then dropped this quote, which unfortunately for Howard was immortalised in the C-SPAN recording of the Senate committee hearing.
And let me say that for the record, I want to state that Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system. Obviously, it would not pass our guidelines.
Never is an awfully long time, Howard. Lincoln's solemn pledge in front of the Senate committee would prove false, even if it did take a full quarter of a century. 25 years after that hearing, Night Trap 25th Anniversary Edition was released on the Nintendo Switch, with a new HD video transfer that made those grabby claws so highly defined you could almost smell the plastic. Finally, after 25 long years, Nintendo fans could get their hands on the game and discover that it was a load of old garbage.
Now, when we released it, the first real question was, what is inside the cube? And I said, and I'm known for these things, I said there's something amazing inside, something life-changing inside. Well, this is what this video is about.
We could have probably made this list just a collection of things said by games industry rascal Peter Molyneux. For years, the man behind Fable, Theme Park and Black and White has been infamous for overpromising ideas, then failing to deliver on them. To some people, this is quite endearing, and he's merely a guy excited about game development who gets carried away. His fantastical promises, like saying you could plant acorns in Fable that would eventually grow into trees, are the stuff of gaming legend. The biggest fib Molyneux ever told, however, was back in 2013 when he introduced his bizarre online social experiment, Curiosity: What's Inside the Cube? Curiosity was a mobile app which gave players around the world a single enormous multi-layered cube, consisting of billions of smaller blocks. Players had to collaboratively tap away at the cube to remove the blocks, with the player who reached the middle and destroyed the final block receiving a prize. What would it be? Nobody knew, except for Molyneux, who teased a prize that was life-changingly amazing by any definition. In fact, in an interview with VG247, he said,
"You can score me on how life-changing it is. Give me a score. And I guarantee you, out of 100, that score will be If not 100, then it'll be 99.
Big talk from Molyneux. Let's see if he can back it up. 6 months after launch and 25 billion cubelets later, the centre of the cube was reached by a Scottish bloke called Brian Henderson, who found it contained a tiny Peter Molyneux.
Welcome to the end of curiosity. We started this experiment back in November of 2012. And we have been completely blown away by how the world has embraced this amazing experiment.
In a naff green-screened video, tiny Peter Molyneux told Brian that his prize was to become, I shit you not, a digital god.
What is in the centre is something that only we can grant. And it is the ability to be a digital god.
This, tiny Peter went on to explain, meant that Brian would be granted the role of God of Gods in his next game, Goddess. Brian pledged Peter would be able to decide the game's rules for 5 to 10 years and would receive a percentage of all profit earned from the game.
You will accrue riches from that game, from the start until the finish of your reign.
Sadly, Goddess never left early access and was never profitable. And the member of staff assigned to keep in contact with Brian and put him into the game left the studio, after which nobody took over. This meant Brian's life-changingly amazing prize ended up being nothing at all. Now about that score, Peter. When you said I could score you on how life-changing that prize was, it's got a 1 in it, but it's not 100.
That, by any definition of the word, is life-changing.
Each of you needs to be willing to die. Anything less, and you're already dead.
Prior to the launch of Mass Effect 3, the Mass Effect games were considered among the most epic space dramas in video game history. Over the course of the first 2 games, your own customised Commander Shepard fought, flew and philandered their way through all manner of interstellar entanglements. Garrus will always have the engine room. As Mass Effect 3 approached, players wondered how the trilogy could possibly conclude in a fitting way. After all, one of the key points of the series was that many of the choices you made had huge repercussions on the storyline, to the extent that some characters literally lived or died depending on what you decided. Producer Mike Gamble seemed to understand the concerns, and in an interview with 360 magazine in the UK, he said, "There are many different endings. We wouldn't do it any other way. How could you go through all 3 campaigns playing as your Shepard and then be forced into a bespoke ending that everyone gets?" Executive producer Casey Hudson went even further and reassured players Mass Effect 3 would have myriad different potential conclusions, to make sure that each player's own unique Commander Shepard adventure would end in a way appropriate to them. It's not even in any way like the traditional game endings, where you can say how many endings there are or whether you got ending A, B or C. No. In fact, what we got was ending red, green or blue. As you might recall, the ending of Mass Effect 3 caused more of a stir than an entire season of the Great British Bake Off, and boiled down to 3 basic colour-coded outcomes, with a few minutes of different cutscenes for each. This was a long way from what was seemingly promised by the producers. Shortchanged Mass Effect fans made their feelings known, and how, to the point where BioWare eventually released a free DLC called the Extended Cut, which added a 4th ending. Wow, 4! So not just A, B and C then. Well, consider me placated.
Because evidently these online games are hard, they can have some nasty issues. I read on the internet that our games have had a few bugs. I did. I read it on the internet, so it's true. And that sometimes it doesn't just work.
Sometimes a developer will say something that's completely accurate and relevant to the game that they're talking about at the time, but is then used against them for other games in the future. Back in 2015, Bethesda was showing off Fallout 4, which was still a few months from release. At one point during the demonstration, the game's director Todd Howard showed off the game's creation engine, demonstrating how easy it was to build your own settlement in the game.
And one of the great things about having a fully dynamic game engine is all of this just works. in real time.
Is one of the things he said. Then, showing how power generators can be placed in your settlement, he said,
and again, it just works.
And you know something? He was right. It just worked. Most people agreed that Fallout 4 was excellent, as evidenced by its high 80s Metacritic score. Case closed, let's move on to the next oh, hang on. A few years later, Bethesda was back with Fallout 76, which used a modified version of the same creation engine. This time things didn't go quite so smoothly, and at launch the thing had more massive bugs than Starship Troopers. And what did the fans use to make fun of this technically wobbly launch? Memes. The internet was suddenly awash with goofs and spoofs of Fallout 76 clips, and Todd Howard with his highly memeable quote, "It just works."
It just works.
It just works. It just works.
Is that entirely fair? Probably not. But it is quite funny.
There goes the neighborhood.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And here's a quote that isn't going to age like milk. You're going to love this video. This video up here from Outside Xtra, you're going to love it. But the only way to find out whether it's going to age like milk is to watch it. You see what I did there? Also, there's a video from Outside Xbox down there as well. And if you'd like to support us, hey, why not head to patreon.com/OXClub and check out the OX Supporters Club. Hope to see you there.